Hey John, thanks for your videos. You've asked some really interesting questions, including about Jacques Lacan, and I'm gonna just put that aside for now and focus more on uh, why I think some version of Plato's philosophy of ideas or forms needs to be resurrected. Um, if it ever really has died, I don't think it has. There's something intelligible about language because it allows us to understand ideas. Um, and, I think it is in speech that ideas come to self understanding prior to participating in our embodied communicative uh, exchanges with one another. Ideas have uh, merely possible reality. They're not yet actual, and they only become so. They only become concrete actualities in the life of the relationship between particular entities, or the life of particular entities in relationship with one another. Um, and of course there are readings of Plato's theory of forms which uh, make it seem as though there is an eternal realm of static, fixed ideas that is entirely separate from and over and above the physical, material world of flux and change, where nothing is what it is, but is always not itself. It's always in the process of becoming. Um, I think that's an unfortunate reading of Plato, though, and uh, you could almost say it's more of a Christian inflection of Platonism that I would want to offer, and I mean a sort of esoteric uh, Christianity, something along the lines of how Hegel was trying to interpret the symbol of the cross, of the coming into time of eternity, of the union and difference, the identity of identity and difference. Um, so instead of in this unfortunate reading of Plato, where we have an eternal divine, um, totally separate from a created world, we have the divine coming into the world and realizing itself fully uh, as a concrete, particular existence, as a person. Or perhaps, um, like Martin Buber, we could say that the divine participates in human experience through uh, I-thou relations, through um, a coming together of I's, of individuals, uh, in an act of love, ultimately. And, I think when we talk about understanding, uh, even for Plato, we're also talking about eros. And philosophy is the love of wisdom, and so understanding doesn't take place merely in the abstract. It takes place because the soul desires knowledge, and this is moving us more in a participatory direction. And I think you're exactly right that it's this participatory epistemology which ultimately allows knowing and being to enter into a more dynamic or dialectical relationship than for much of the Western tradition we've been stuck with. This dualism between thought and being is what's led to Cartesian dualism, and this idea that there is an alienated subject that is passively um, subject to a pre-existing objective material world. The reason I like philosophers like Evan Thompson and Francisco Varela, and Varela was also a biologist, but if you're not a philosopher and you're trying to do biology, it doesn't usually work out. You end up with someone like Richard Dawkins, who cannot reflect upon uh, the pre-theoretical assumptions that he makes when he says, that, oh, he doesn't really mean the genes are selfish, it's just a metaphor. Well, what's the relationship exactly that you're positing between human description and objective nature? So Evan Thompson's biology, I think, allows us to put the knowing subject back in the world, and it's that sort of an incarnational direction, or it's an incarnational flavor, I think, that is necessary for the spirit of the times that we're collectively experiencing right now. We can't simply do away with the transcendental and focus entirely on the immanent, because focusing only on the immanent leaves you with industrial capitalism, where only what can be weighed and measured counts as valuable. Something like friendship quickly becomes at least more difficult, if not impossible, when every individual has private property, because it's your property that ultimately separates you from others in some ultimate way. And until you can share, until you own nothing individually, how can you really have any friends? I think that was Hegel's argument, obviously, and Marx did what he would with it. But when we talk about biology, the way that Evan Thompson or Varela would talk about it, a living organism has a relationship to final causes and formal causes. The shape that my body takes is an idea. It's the effect of an idea. Now, we can't point to the idea in the physical world. I can't show you the cause of my physical form. I couldn't show you my soul, but the soul is the invisible idea underlying the body, which we see as its effect. And only in understanding can we appreciate that fact. We can't see it physically through empirical study. We have to inwardly come to an understanding. And I think we can go beyond Kant and not just say that these inward understandings or intuitions of forms and purposes in organisms. I think we can say that they're actually there in the organism that we are describing, because our description is really a participation in the idea motivating the organism in question. So when we talk about something like pan-experientialism, and what comes along with pan-experientialism, the idea that feeling goes all the way down, and that what eventually became consciousness didn't suddenly emerge at some point out of what had been a material, completely dead and non-experiential world prior. I think experience is fundamental to existence. There's no being without reflection on that being in some primitive form. Because there is reflection on being is becoming. Because reflection it's a dynamic thing. It has values, and it wants to change what is. And so we get an evolutionary universe. And so I think what I'm arguing here about pan-experientialism is that evolution implies it, unless we're going to say that human consciousness, human experience, is somehow an anomaly or a fluke and has no essential or necessary relationship to the rest of nature. I think, just like Whitehead and like someone like Teilhard de Chardin, that science, to become to gain knowledge, must include its own acts of consciousness, its own its own knowledge in its understanding of nature. So science can only conceive of a universe in which intelligent reflection upon the universe is possible. And in cosmology, they call this the anthropic principle, and there's various inflections of exactly how it is to be expressed. Some say it's a mere tautology, but I think it's a bit more profound than that, to consider having to include the conditions making possible your own understanding of nature in your understanding of nature. Because granted, there is one universe, and our experience is a function of it. There isn't a separate realm interacting, a mental substance interacting with the physical substance of the universe. The universe is an experience of itself in various forms and at various levels. I think there are neurons in my body. Each one has an experience of itself, and in having an experience of itself, unconsciously participates in the experience of an entire nervous system of tens of billions, hundreds of billions of other neurons. And in a similar way, each of us as apparently separate human beings with our own individual consciousness, unconsciously participate in a much larger social organism. Another thing to remember about Plato is that for him, doing philosophy is practicing for death. Or philosophy is learning to die, as Socrates put it. And, that means that right from the very get-go, we're trying to include ourselves in a larger whole that isn't immediately apparent to us. It's easy to say, all I know is life, is this life. I have memories, starting around the age of 5 or whenever, and before that, I have no idea. And what happens after death, how am I supposed to know? Well, I think what Plato forces us to come to terms with is that if we want to know anything at all, we've got to begin with death, and with perhaps what came before birth. And, Plato probably got this from Pythagoras, who got it from India. But Plato had a doctrine of transmigration of souls and reincarnation, and certainly believed in a sort of life after death for the soul. And what that means exactly, of course, our language fails, I think, to adequately describe and define and explain how the soul can leave the body, or what that even means. But the point is, it's an experience that we will have, and Plato was an initiate into the mysteries of mystery schools, and they probably ingested some sort of mind-altering substance and had a death rebirth experience, and that, I would say, is the foundation of this sort of Platonic, idealistic, certainly worldview. The idea that this life is not the life that we see and experience externally with our senses, is not the full extent of our soul's experience. There's a larger arc to our experience that includes death and rebirth. And I think, perhaps we can explore that in further videos, but I think this one's long enough. Hopefully I answered all your questions. I'm not sure, but either way, hopefully it sparks something. Get back to me. Take it easy, John.